Before there were courts of law, before there were philosophers to parse the ethics of killing, there was only the raw, thumping blood and the terrifying certainty that vengeance would always find a way. We look back at the House of Atreus not just as a story, but as a mirror held up to the darkest corners of the human soul, a family tree so poisoned that its roots drank from the blood of children. The tale of Orestes is the climax of this ancient curse, a story that asks the terrifying question: when does the cycle of horror end? Does justice mean an eye for an eye until the whole world is blind? It is a myth of matricide and madness, of the old chthonic gods dying so that a new order of reason might be born. We stand on the precipice of the ancient Greek world, a cosmos balanced precariously between the light of Olympus and the dark of the underworld. The Greeks understood that Crimea, specifically the shedding of kindred blood, was a stain that could not be washed away by water, only by more blood. This was the era of the Furies, the Erinyes, the sleeper agents of fate. They were not the monsters you fought with a sword, but the consequences of your own actions, given claws and wings. In the city of Argos, a city of golden idols and hidden wickedness, the royal house of Mycenae was a slaughterhouse waiting for its next victim. The story begins where most tragedies end, with a king dead in his bath. Agamemnon, the great commander of the Greeks, had returned from Troy to a wife who had spent 10 years nursing a hatred sharper than a spear. Clytemnestra, aided by her lover Aegisthus, had entangled the returning hero in a fishing net and hacked him to death with an axe. But the crime was not just the murder of a king. It was a betrayal of the sacred bond between mother and son. For while Clytemnestra swung the axe, her daughter Electra stood by, helpless, and her son Orestes was spirited away into exile. The years passed like slow poison. Orestes grew to manhood in the wilds of Phocis, haunted by the ghost of a father he could not avenge and a mother he was bound to honor. The god Apollo, the oracle of Delphi, saw in this young man the instrument of a violent, necessary cleansing. Apollo did not deal in half measures. He whispered into the young Prince's ear that the stain on his house could only be scrubbed away with the blood of those who spilled it. He gave Orestes a terrifying mandate: kill your mother, or be haunted forever. Orestes returned to Argos not as a son, but as an executioner. Disguised, he crept into the palace that smelled of incense and old death. With him was his friend Pylades, the silent witness to his doom. They found Clytemnestra, the queen who wore her power like a heavy robe. In a moment of supreme horror, Orestes hesitated, not because of fear, but because the laws of nature screamed that a son should not raise his hand against the womb that bore him. But the voice of Apollo urged him on. The blade flashed. The queen fell. Aegisthus followed her into the dark. Immediately, the air in the palace changed. The victory felt sour, the silence heavy. Orestes stood over the bodies, expecting to feel relief, but he felt only the cold breath of the earth rising up to claim him. He looked at his hands, and instead of flesh, he saw blackness. The myths tell us that he looked up and saw the Furies. Imagine the horror. They were not beautiful like the Olympians. They were ancient, winged shadows with eyes dripping blood, their hair writhing with serpents. They did not speak in words, but in shrieks, the sound of victima-s rage echoing through the halls of eternity. They were the Eumenides, the kindly Onisa, ironically named because to speak their true name was to summon them. They hunted him, not just to kill him, but to drive him mad. Orestes ran. He fled the palace. He fled the city of Argos. He fled the civilized world. But you cannot outrun your own conscience. For years, he wandered the earth, a raving madman, biting at the air, clawing at his skin, seeing the Gorgon-like faces of his Mothra as murderers in every shadow. Wherever he stepped, The ground turned sour, cattle miscarried, crops withered, and men turned away in fear. The Furies were the embodiment of memory. They were the memory of the crime refusing to fade. Desperate, Orestes sought the only refuge left for the damned, the oracle at Delphi. But even Apollo's sanctuary was not safe. The Furies, creatures of the old earth, cared nothing for the bright new gods of the sky. They surrounded the temple, chanting their sleep-inducing curses, trapping Orestes in a web of guilt. It was here that the god of light intervened, not with a sword, but with a command. Apollo, along with the goddess Athena, decreed that the cycle of blood must stop. They dragged the exhausted prince to Athens, to the Areopagus, the hill of Ares, to face the first trial in history. It is a scene of breathtaking, unprecedented tension. The old world against the new. The Furies, ancient daughters of night, stood before the court. They argued a simple, terrifying truth: blood demands blood. Amothra's life is sacred. The bond of the womb is the primal law of nature. If a son kills the mother, he destroys the very root of life. By their logic, Orestes was already dead. His soul belonged to them. Orestes spoke, his voice thin and trembling. He admitted the act. He admitted he took his Mothra's life. But he claimed his defense was not in his own hands, but in the command of the god Apollo. Apollo himself appeared, a blinding figure of reason against the dark chaos of the Furies. He argued a new, shocking logic. The mother is not the true parent, merely the vessel for the seed of the father, who is the true source of life. It was a desperate, patriarchal twist, a weapon forged to sever the ancient power of the feminine. The tie was deadlocked. The jurors, the greatest citizens of Athens, were split. The fate of the hero, and perhaps the fate of civilization itself, hung by a thread. Then, Athena, the gray-eyed goddess of wisdom, cast her vote. She broke the tie. She voted for Orestes, not because murder is good, but because she represented a new order of one where the violence of the past must be replaced by the judgment of the state. Justice was no longer a private matter of clan vengeance. It was a public matter of law. The Furies did not take this defeat lightly. They raged against the upstart gods, threatening to poison the very soil of Athens, to rot the harvest and sicken the children. But Athena did not draw her sword. She did not fight them. She did something the ancient gods rarely did. She offered them respect. She did not banish them. She invited them to stay. She promised them a place of honor in the city, not as monsters of vengeance, but as goddesses of Justitia, the Semni Theai, the gracious ones. She offered them a home in a cavern beneath the hill of Ares, a place where they would be worshipped, where they would ensure that oaths were kept and laws were obeyed. Slowly, the black robes of the Furies faded. The serpents in their hair calmed. Their eyes of blood softened. They accepted the bargain. Vengeance was transformed into justice. Terror was transmuted into order. Orestes was free. The curse on the house of Atreus was finally, after generations of slaughter, broken. He could walk in the sunlight again. The cycle had stopped. What did this mean to the Greeks? It was nothing less than the birth of their civilization. This myth is a bridge over a dark chasm. On one side is the old world, where justice is a primal scream, a tooth for a tooth, an endless river of blood that day.